The world's strongest armies were watching closely. But in that single night, it wasn't the missiles that shook them. It was the fact that Iran made them hesitate. That night marked more than just a military exchange. It was the kind of moment that doesn't get buried in history books. It reshapes them. For decades, the balance of global power had been dictated by the superpowers. Their fleets roamed seas unchecked, their airbases stretched across continents, and their threats were usually enough to keep smaller nations in line. But on this night, Iran changed the script. The world expected chaos, destruction, maybe even a reckless gamble. Instead, what unfolded was something far more unnerving for the West. Iran didn't just fire missiles, it fired a message. A message that said, "We are not afraid, we are not weak, and we will not bow." That message didn't echo in empty skies, it landed directly in the war rooms of Washington, London, and beyond. Suddenly, the superpowers who had been used to acting without hesitation found themselves pausing. And that pause was everything. Because in geopolitics, hesitation is a sign of vulnerability. For the first time in years, the so-called untouchable powers were blinking, uncertain of their next move. Iran had forced them into a corner without needing to invade, occupy, or destroy. This was not just a clash of weapons, it was a clash of willpower, a moment where raw strength met unshakable defiance. And as the dust settled, one truth became undeniable. Iran had not only defended its ground, it had shifted the global balance, if only for a night when the world's superpowers blinked first. In global politics, moments arrive when a single act forces even the most powerful nations to reassess their position. The night Iran made the superpowers blink first was one of those defining moments. For decades, Western powers had projected themselves as untouchable. Their military might, economic sanctions, and diplomatic pressure meant that no regional player dared to openly defy them. But Iran changed the script. That night was not about missiles or military hardware alone. It was about psychology. Iran demonstrated a level of resolve that shocked policymakers in Washington, London, and even in allied capitals. They had expected Iran to back down, to stay cautious, and to remain within the limits set by the West. Instead, Iran crossed a line that was previously unthinkable. This bold defiance was more than just a response. It was a statement: we are not afraid of your threats. What made the moment even more powerful was how calculated it appeared. It wasn't reckless aggression, but a carefully measured move designed to send a message without tipping the world into full-scale war. In doing so, Iran revealed something crucial: that even superpowers could be forced into hesitation when confronted with a determined adversary willing to take risks. For ordinary people watching around the globe, this was a reminder that power is not always about size. Sometimes it is about conviction. By standing firm against overwhelming odds, Iran shifted the balance of fear from themselves to their rivals. This keynote sets the foundation for understanding why that night was a turning point in modern geopolitics. It wasn't just Iran who blinked back, it was the world's biggest players who suddenly found themselves on the defensive. When Iran acted boldly that night, the world turned its eyes not just to Tehran, but also to Washington, Brussels, and other Western capitals. Everyone waited for the inevitable: a swift, crushing response from the superpowers. After all, this had always been the pattern: one move against Western interests, and retaliation was certain. Yet, this time, the silence was deafening. That silence was not a sign of strength, it was hesitation. Behind closed doors, leaders of the superpowers weighed their options and realized that responding aggressively might trigger consequences they were not ready to face. Iran had called their bluff. Suddenly, the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the West for decades cracked. Their threats, once seen as guarantees of action, now looked like empty posturing. This moment revealed something deeper about the shifting global order. The West was no longer in a position to dictate every outcome. Economic strains, endless foreign entanglements, and political divisions had weakened their resolve. For the first time, Iran's defiance created doubt in the minds of ordinary citizens worldwide. Maybe the superpowers aren't as untouchable as we've been told. The hesitation itself became the message. Every hour without a response showed the world that fear had shifted camps. Iran had done what few dared, forced the superpowers to calculate, to delay, and ultimately to back away from immediate confrontation. In geopolitics, silence can be louder than any speech or statement. That night, the superpowers' lack of decisive action gave Iran an unexpected victory, the victory of perception. And perception, in global politics often matters as much as reality. The night Iran made the superpowers blink first was not just a military standoff. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. In the modern world, wars are rarely won only on battlefields, they are won in the minds of both leaders and populations. Iran understood this perfectly. By showing it was willing to take bold risks, Iran shifted the psychological balance. For decades, Western powers relied on fear as their strongest weapon. The idea was simple. The threat of overwhelming retaliation was enough to keep smaller nations in line. But Iran flipped this logic. Instead of being intimidated, Iran projected calm determination. It was a signal not only to its adversaries but also to its own people: we will not be broken by pressure. This strengthened national morale at home while planting seeds of doubt abroad. The genius of this moment was that Iran didn't need to fight a long war or match the West's firepower. It only needed to show resolve. And that alone was enough to change the narrative. The superpowers, accustomed to dominating through intimidation, now faced an opponent who refused to play by their rules. That defiance itself became a weapon. Globally, this had ripple effects. Other nations watching closely began to question whether standing up to the West was as impossible as it once seemed. If Iran could resist and walk away without being crushed, perhaps the balance of power was more fragile than believed. This keynote highlights a crucial truth. Real strength is not just about weapons or armies, but about willpower. Iran's psychological victory that night exposed the vulnerability of even the mightiest powers when their confidence is shaken. The night Iran made the superpowers blink first did not just alter the dynamics between Tehran and the West. It sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East. For years, many nations in the region had walked cautiously, aligning themselves with the West or staying silent to avoid conflict. Iran's defiance, however, broke that silence. Suddenly, governments, political movements, and even ordinary citizens across the Arab and Muslim world began to view the global balance differently. For regional powers long under Western pressure, this moment was more than symbolic. It was inspirational. If Iran could face the strongest nations on Earth and come out unscathed, then the myth of Western invulnerability was shattered. This empowered smaller states and resistance movements, encouraging them to believe that they too had agency in shaping their future, rather than being mere subjects of superpower dictates. It also exposed divisions among U.S. allies in the region. Some quietly admired Iran's resolve, while others, dependent on Western protection, grew more anxious. The narrative of "only the West can guarantee stability" lost credibility. Public opinion shifted as well. Millions of people in the region saw Iran as standing up for independence and dignity, even if they didn't agree with all of its politics. The ripple effect was not limited to the Middle East either. Across the global South, countries wary of Western dominance found in this event a symbolic victory that resonated with their own struggles. The psychological impact traveled far beyond borders, reinforcing the idea that global power was no longer one-sided. In essence, Iran's stand was not just its own, it became a rallying point for those seeking a multipolar world where superpowers could no longer dictate every outcome. For decades, the superpowers thrived on one central belief: that their power was unquestionable, their dominance untouchable, and their retaliation inevitable. This myth of invincibility kept smaller nations compliant and ensured global obedience. But the night Iran made the superpowers blink first, that myth was shattered in full view of the world. When Iran stood firm and refused to back down, it proved something the West never wanted acknowledged: that even the strongest can hesitate, that even the most powerful can be forced into doubt. This single moment broke the illusion that Western dominance was absolute. Once that illusion cracked, it could never be fully repaired. The breaking of this myth had enormous consequences. Fear, which was the West's greatest tool, no longer worked in the same way. Other nations saw that defiance was possible, that survival was achievable even against the greatest odds. The superpowers suddenly looked more vulnerable, not because their weapons or economies had weakened, but because their aura of certainty was gone. In geopolitics, perception is often as powerful as reality. For years, the perception was that resistance was futile. That night changed it forever. By standing firm, Iran did more than win a standoff. It rewrote the psychological rules of global power. From that moment on, the world understood that the West could be challenged, and sometimes even forced to retreat. This keynote reminds us that invincibility is not a reality but a carefully maintained image, Once broken, it can never be restored fully. And that night, Iran not only defended itself, it broke an image that had shaped world politics for generations. History is not only written in treaties, wars, or speeches. Sometimes it is written in silence, in hesitation, in that brief moment when the mighty realize they are not invincible. The night Iran made the superpowers blink first was one such moment. It wasn't just about missiles, politics, or strategies. It was about power shifting from illusion to reality, from intimidation to defiance. That night exposed the cracks in a system that had long appeared unshakable. For decades, the world was told that resistance was futile, that superpowers always had the last word. Yet, in one calculated act of defiance, Iran proved that even giants can falter when faced with unwavering conviction. And in that hesitation, the myth of absolute dominance collapsed. But the deeper truth lies not only in Iran's courage, but in what it symbolized for the rest of the world. It showed that strength is not always measured in tanks or jets, but in the will to stand tall when fear says bow down. It revealed that the balance of power in our age is no longer one-directional. It can shift in an instant when the oppressed refuse to surrender. The night Iran made the superpowers blink first will be remembered not just as a geopolitical episode, but as a turning point in the psychology of global politics. It was a reminder that history belongs not only to the strong, but to the steadfast, to those who dare to say no when the world expects submission. And perhaps years from now, when future generations study the unraveling of unipolar dominance, they will look back at that night as the spark, the moment when fear changed sides and the world began to believe that even the superpowers could be forced to blink.